Welcome all of you to today's program on Mahatma's letters. Let us begin this session with the universal invocation. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. Namaste and welcome once again to all of you. Today we are going to study the letters from the Masters of the Wisdom first series, letter number 6 and 7. And this letter, the study will be conducted by Brother B.D. Tendulkar. He is a very well-known figure in the Theosophical circles. He is a veteran member of the Theosophical Society, which he joined in 1979. He was formerly the president of the Pune Lodge, and he also served as the secretary of the Marathi Theosophical Federation. Brother Tendulkar also edited the Federation's bi-monthly periodical, which was Jagriti. Presently, he is the national lecturer of the Indian section and has contributed a lot in the propagation of Theosophy by writing various articles and giving lectures at different lodges all over India. I welcome Brother Tendulkar and I request him to begin the study session today. I think we have lost connection with Brother Tendulkar ji. So I request you all.
He joined.
Okay.
तेंडुलकर सर अनम्यूट करा. हेलो तेंडुलकर सर.
हेलो.
हाँ, आप स्टार्ट करिए.
हाँ, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, I will start now. At the outset, I thank the Indian section and particularly Pradeep ji Mahapatra, who is organizing and coordinating this program on behalf of Indian section, for giving me this opportunity to express myself in this study program, online study program of Mahatma letters from the Master of the Wisdom. Particularly today we are dealing with letter number 6 and 7 from the second section of the first series on path of discipleship. The first letter which we are going to deal with is a letter written to Pandit Prananath from Gwalior. This is letter number 6. This section is particularly on path of discipleship, so there are number of questions raised by the would-be disciples, and they are seeking guidance from the masters. So there are questions relating to the sadhana, how to treat the path of discipleship or the spiritual path. Pandit Prananath has asked certain questions which I read for the information of the listeners. The first question is, do I tread the right path? Second is my present way of life conducive to spiritual advancement? Am I capable of greatly influencing my next birth by good karmas in this life, by strenuously following the bent of my heart as it is at present? What should I do to have the honor of prostrating myself at your blessed feet? These are questions asked from different angles by a person who is keen to get in touch with the masters, to have an opportunity to meet them and surrender himself to the master and get their blessings, to be at their feet. And in that context, Brother Prananath is keen to know the way he was leading his life is in order, or does it need any correction? Whether his present way of life is conducive to spiritual advancement, whether the path he is treading is the right path. He wants to get confirmation from the master. So master has not applied directly to the questions raised, but in a general way, master has clarified that this is a process of self-purification. And it goes on. It's not a process for few days or months or years even. It requires sometimes series of lives. And you have to carry it on from incarnation to incarnation. Man, when he realizes that he has to lead a different kind of life, change from the pravrutti marga to nivrutti marga, the whole approach, mode of living needs to be reviewed from all angles. And one has to see every thought, feeling, action that he faces in his day-to-day life is taking him in the right direction or otherwise. Because there are, in the previous life, occasions when we are on the pravrutti marga, we follow ways and means to achieve our worldly goals, where the objects are diametrically opposed to the spiritual goal. And those habits have set in tendencies which are diametrically opposite to the goal. And therefore, the problem is to observe those tendencies and to strenuously work for removal, uprooting of those tendencies which are not really consistent with our goal, consistent with our final destination on the spiritual path. And this is what Master is referring to as not a work of a day or month or year. It will take a long time. If we have done wrong things for a long time, naturally, we should be ready to spend a long time to take corrective action, to do or to undo whatever wrong we have done in the past. And that requires efforts, strenuous efforts of long duration, consistent efforts, continuous efforts for a very long time before one comes near to the threshold. This requires not just superficial efforts, not just something which will only show to the others that we are observing or treading the spiritual path. It should come from the bottom of our heart. It requires complete honesty and sincerity. There should be nothing hidden within, which is inconsistent with our spiritual endeavor. Yes, firstly, our aspiration has to be genuine. There should be no mingling of any worldly purposes coupled with spiritual objectives. Master has said at one place, one should be like a child. There should be that innocence of a child in our living. As we grow, we adopt all worldly practices, fashions. We adopt ways of life based on etiquettes, manners which are currently acceptable, popular to the society, to the people among whom we live. And they are not necessarily consistent with our spiritual objectives. It requires, therefore, courage, boldness, even to go against the popular practices. And it should be from our soul. We have to be ready to drop all the vices, including the hidden ones, and strengthen our virtues. Because once we start treading the path, the hidden vices and virtues find an expression in our outward life. And vices, when they are amplified, take a form with which one finds it difficult to manage. Sometimes things go totally out of hand. Even there are cases where people lose their balance, equilibrium, and go astray. Even there are cases where people have become mad. So one has to take oneself fully in control of one's vices and virtues, especially those which are hidden ones, which are not very obvious to us unless we are honest to ourselves in our self-observation. So, unless we are prepared to accept ourselves as we are, and then with firm determination, prepared to bring about a change, because there is always a tendency to resist any change. And that comes at the personality level. And what is at the personality level ends with our death. Here the question which Brother Prannath has asked is, am I capable of greatly influencing my next birth by good karmas in this life, by strenuously following the bent of my heart as it is at present? So, no doubt, one has to understand oneself, to search what lies at the bottom of the heart. What is the natural bent of heart? And whether that bent is conducive, consistent with our aspirations. And there arises the need to change that bent if it is not in line with our aspirations. And for that, we have to examine all our karmas to be able to discriminate between right and wrong karmas, to pursue consistently and strenuously our good karmas, and to deviate from, desist from our bad karmas, and to drop them ultimately. It is only by this process over a long period of time that these things will form part of our causal body, the Karan Deha. It is only then that one can transfer things from this incarnation to the next life. So that is required, and that for that one has to be like a child. One has to drop all the unwanted things which we have gathered and accumulated when we left that childhood and entered the adulthood and acquired all unwanted worldly things. So all those things need to be dropped and become like a child if we really want to influence our next birth by right karmas in this life. The rules of the occult or the spiritual world are not the same as our rules in worldly life, our standards of righteousness, our standards of morality, honesty. In worldly life are more governed by the prevailing practices, customs, traditions, what is taught to us or imbibed on our minds from childhood by our parents, by our priests, by our religion, by our scriptures. And they are not necessarily in true spirit what would be considered as righteousness. And therefore, unless we are able to make this discrimination of what is really righteousness in spiritual sense, and not merely a sentimental or emotional manifestation of our spiritual aspirations. There should be a settled conviction about what we are going to achieve or which we are aspiring to achieve. Unless there is that genuine aspiration coupled with settled, firm conviction, we may not be able to achieve what we intend to achieve in spiritual life. Therefore, Master are cautioning that unless one becomes like a child, it is better to leave discipleship aside. Therefore, one has not only to aspire for himself, for his spiritual advancement and progress, he has to be broad in his outlook. He has to be concerned with his fellow men, their well-being, their welfare, their progress. He has to come forward in service of those fellow men who are in distress, who are in pain, who are suffering. And for this, one has to keep aside one's own personal concerns and start living for others. If that change comes in one's life, then only perhaps it is possible that one's aspirations could be realized. If not in these incarnations, because it's a task of several incarnations. It depends upon when you begin. The questioner has asked how long it takes. And therefore, Master had said, it's not an affair of a day or month or years. It will continue for ages or incarnations. So, this should go on for a long time, leaving all considerations of the self aside, living for others, living for fellow men, seeing happiness in the happiness of others, feeling pain when others are suffering from pain. It is only then that one may have that honor of prostrating oneself at the feet of the masters. So masters expect disciple to learn what their role is in the occult hierarchy, what they really stand for. And one who understands that nature and work of the master rightly and lives his life in right earnest in order to serve the masters in their work for the mankind as a whole. They follow the occult rules, which does not make partiality, does not do favoritism. They strictly follow the law. Law is law. And nothing can deflect us from observance of that law. That is what they say. So, law for them is God. And that is what the disciple has to learn. This law is not the man-made law, but the universal law. The law which governs the universe. Law which is based on universal morality. Law which is based on universal brotherhood. So that law needs to be understood and lived by a would-be disciple or an aspirant in his life. And that is what the broadly Master has conveyed to the questioner. The same has been repeated perhaps in letter number 9 as a postscript, where the Master says, same thing, the process of self-realization, self-purification is not the work of a moment, nor of a few months, but of years. And there he says, the later a man begins living the higher life, the longer must be his period of probation. So, there is no standard by which we can measure the time required for this spiritual attainment, the highest point, the threshold. It depends upon where we begin, how we begin, with what determination. If we start late, naturally, we will reach the destination late as compared to those who have started much earlier. Therefore, we find these differences among the people and their attainments on the spiritual path. We cannot compare one with the other. Each one has started his journey at a time when he realizes the purpose of life and his own destiny. When we take our destiny in our own hand, that is a starting point. From there we begin. So earlier we start, the better it is. Earlier we will reach the destination. And those who start late have to have patience to wait. But Master also says, don't just wait and watch for instructions. One has to take his destiny in his own hands, means one has to seek the opportunities. Opportunities come, and if we don't avail of them, they are lost. And they are perhaps lost for a considerable time in future. Therefore, we must be on lookout for the opportunities on the spiritual path, take hold of them, and make the best use of those opportunities. For that, an aspirant has to be watchful. He need not watch and wait for instructions from the masters to tell them this is the opportunity, pick this up. Even they have said that in respect of HPB and Colonel Olcott, they did not guide them as to how to form the Theosophical Society, where to form it. It was all left to them at their initiative to go ahead. So that kind of initiative is expected on the part of every aspirant. One has to look out for those opportunities. One has to take hold of them make the best use of them, spend all available energy and resources to achieve the results, and this should be go on without too much of expectation of results, but more focusing on the work and duty that one is expected to do, with always attention focused on the ultimate goal, the purpose of life. So that is, in nutshell, what perhaps we can say about letter number 6. Then we come to letter number 7. This is a letter written to Brother C.W. Leadbeater by Master K.H. This letter has little different background. As you know, Brother Leadbeater joined the Theosophical Society in March 84. And earlier, he wrote the letter in March 1884. That time, he was involved in many activities of investigative spiritualism. It was not just out of curiosity on the part of many who use various kinds of means like planchets or seances to get in touch with departed souls and try to establish communications with them and satisfy their spiritual curiosity. Leadbeater was more concerned with the development of those powers, spiritual powers. And therefore, he was in touch with some of the well-known mediums which were known in those days. And in his effort, he established contact with one named Ernest on a seance through the medium of Eglinton. Why I say this? Because this manner in which Leadbeater tried to establish contact on seance was not a desirable mode of contacting the masters. They have discouraged these modes because generally one doesn't get the results which are trustworthy. Whom you contact on seance or on planchet, etc., are not necessarily those whom you intend to contact. And therefore, there is a possibility that one may get illusioned and disappointed and may even get involved into black powers, etc. Here in this case, there were several mediums, and Leadbeater was in contact with them while on the seance. One of them was a red Indian lady, another was an Arab, Abdullah, and there was one more, Ernest. He was good at speaking and writing, and in the course of conversation about the masters, he indicated to Leadbeater that he knows about the masters and he is in a position to contact them. And Leadbeater perhaps believed him and inquired whether he can get in touch with the masters of wisdom, Master K particularly. And Ernest said that he can deliver a message or letter if he is interested. So Leadbeater consulted A.P. Sinnett, whom he considered as his guide in those early days when he had entered the Theosophical Society, and A.P. Sinnett was a senior person in those days for Mr. Leadbeater. A.P. Sinnett also gave him a green signal to go ahead, and therefore Leadbeater prepared a letter for the master and closed it in an envelope, prepared another letter for Ernest, and closed that into again another envelope and a third envelope for Mr. Eglinton. He handed that over to Eglinton, who promised to keep it at a place where from Ernest would collect it. So all these precautions were taken to enter into communication with the masters, taking all precautions of secrecy with sealed envelopes, etc. And he was given an understanding on seance again that the envelope has disappeared. That is what Eglinton told. And then later on, Ernest confirmed that it has been delivered to the great master. Later was delivered, as he said, but no reply came. For a long time, Leadbeater waited, but there was no reply. But there was a suggestion from HPB to Leadbeater not to be too enthusiastic in these spirituality investigations. So months passed, and it was at the end of October, 30th October 84, almost 8 months after the letter was posted by Leadbeater, that when Leadbeater had gone to London, he was at a place about 47 miles away from London. So he had gone to say goodbye to HPB, who was scheduled to sail for India from London. So that time he was told by HPB. It was a message from DK, Jwal Kul, that he was informed that his letter has been replied. But till then, he had not received any reply. But when he went back to Brahmas, he found a letter there in reply to his letter of March. It was from the master. Master, at the start of the letter only, confirmed that his letter has not reached him. So that was something surprising, because in the meanwhile, he had received back the unopened envelope of his letter, from which, when it was opened, the letter addressed to master had disappeared, and only letter addressed to Ernest was there with the remarks that letter has been delivered. So here, when he received the letter, it became very clear to him that his letter had never reached the master. But still master said, your contents have reached me. Contents of the letter has reached me. And how? Because when the leadbeater was writing the letter, that time itself, master knew that he is sending a letter to him. So here, one thing becomes clear, that for them, if they want to really communicate, they don't need all these channels of spiritualistic means like planchette or seance and all others. Because they can communicate at any place, at any time. If they really find it necessary, and if the person with whom they communicate deserves that. Here perhaps leadbeater deserved it. Therefore, they paid attention to his letter when he was writing, and the contents were known to them. But perhaps the time was not right to reply it. So they only conveyed through Jwal Kul, through HPB, that he should not get himself involved into these spiritualistic exercises to contact the masters. But till then, leadbeater was not aware that it was message from the masters. He only thought that it was a suggestion from HPB. So this is something which is to be seriously noted by people who are aspiring to get in touch with the masters, that this kind of means like seance or planchette, etc., are not worth trying by the aspirants. There are more dangers than advantage involved in these kind of spiritualistic exercises.
Tendulkar sir,
They get in touch with what they intended.
you take another 5 minutes to close the.
Okay. Thank you, brother. I will conclude within 5 minutes. So there, CWN took that warning, and then later on changed the ways. To learn, he had written to master that he wants to get in touch with them so that he learns more about the truth. So for that purpose, he wanted to place himself as a chela under Master K. And he had expressed in his letter that he knew this was again the understanding given to him by presided, with whom he was in close touch in those days. And he was considering him as his guide. So he consulted again presided on that matter. And presided told him that to become a chela, one has to go to India and put in a period of probation of 7 years. So he inquired, CWL inquired with the masters whether is it necessary, essential, because it was not possible for Mr. Leadbeater in that situation to live for India for 7 years. He was a priest, assistant priest, or a curate in Church of England. At Bramhurst, there was a great parish, and he was very much involved in the church work. And it was his uncle who was the in charge, and Leadbeater, along with one more person, were assistant priest, assisting him in all the work. The Leadbeater and his mother, his father had expired much earlier. Though they were in a financially well-off position, the bank in which they had savings had collapsed, got liquidated, and all the money was lost, and they had to depend on the uncle. Therefore, he left his clerical job elsewhere and joined his uncle as an assistant priest in the church, and that was the work of his liking. So he continued there for a couple of years, I believe. And much of the work of his uncle was discharged by Leadbeater, since his uncle was involved with the university, and he has delegated much of his work to the trust of Mr. Leadbeater. And therefore, if Leadbeater had left for India, there was a problem of substitute being found for Leadbeater, and it would have put his uncle into great difficulties. That was a feeling. Therefore, the Leadbeater has a feeling that there were family gratitudes, and these could be perhaps hurt by his sudden leaving to India. Therefore, he was under obligation to serve the Church of England under the guidance of his uncle. And that was the difficulty which he pointed out in his letter to Master K.H. and sought the guidance whether there is any possibility of his taking a chelaship under Master K.H. under those circumstances, in view of the compulsion of 7 years probation in India being difficult for him to fulfill. So here, I think I will stop today.
Yes.
We will continue this further on 10th of June, when Brother Pradeep ji has given me the further session to continue this topic and complete the letter. Thank you, brothers, for the opportunity given to me and for your kind listening.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother Tendulkar ji.
Thank you. Yes.
And I now request Sister Meenakshi ji to give us the translation in Hindi.
नमस्ते. थैंक यू सिस्टर. थैंक यू ब्रदर तेंदुलकर जी.
Thank you.
आज हम लेटर्स फ्रॉम द मास्टर्स ऑफ विजडम के सीरीज 1 से लेटर नंबर 6 ले रहे हैं. 6 और 7 ले रहे हैं. लेटर नंबर 6, यह पत्र चेला पद के बारे में ग्वालियर के पंडित प्राणनाथ के प्रश्नों के उत्तर में मास्टर के एच का यह पत्र है, जो कि उन्हें जनवरी 1883 में मिलता है. पंडित प्राणनाथ के प्रश्न इस प्रकार थे: क्या मैं सही मार्ग पर चल रहा हूँ? क्या मेरी वर्तमान जीवन शैली आध्यात्मिक उन्नति के लिए अनुकूल है? क्या मैं अपने अगले जन्म को इस जीवन के अच्छे कर्मों द्वारा प्रभावित करने में सक्षम हूँ, जैसा कि वर्तमान में मेरे दिल के झुकाव का सख्ती से पालन कर रहा हूँ? आपके पूज्य चरणों में दंडवत करने का गौरव प्राप्त करने के लिए मुझे क्या करना चाहिए? इन प्रश्नों पर मास्टर के एच उत्तर देते हैं: आत्मशुद्धिकरण की प्रक्रिया यह एक पल का काम नहीं है, न ही कुछ महीनों का या वर्षों का, यह तो अनेक जन्मों का है. एक व्यक्ति अपनी जिंदगी में उच्चतर जीवन की शुरुआत जितनी देरी से करेगा, उतना ही लंबा उसका परिवेक्षण काल होगा, यानी प्रोबेशन काल होगा, क्योंकि उसे वास्तविक लक्ष्य के विपरीत विषयों में बिताए गए अनेक वर्षों के प्रभावों का नाश करना होगा. उसके प्रयास जितने श्रमदायी होंगे और उसके कार्य के परिणाम जितने उज्जवल होंगे, उतना ही वह अपने लक्ष्य के करीब आएगा. यदि उसकी आकांक्षा खरी है, दृढ़ विश्वासपूर्ण है, न कि क्षणिक भावुकतापूर्ण, दृढ़ संकल्प को अनेकों में फैलाकर वह अंततः उसे उसकी इच्छा पूर्ति की ओर ले जाता है. अगला पत्र है लेटर नंबर 7. यह पत्र मास्टर के एच CW लेडबिटर को लिखते हैं 31 अक्टूबर 1884 में. चेला पद के बारे में CW लेडबिटर के प्रश्नों का उत्तर मास्टर के एच इस पत्र के माध्यम से देते हैं. मास्टर कहते हैं, 3 मार्च 1884 को आपने मेरे लिए एक पत्र लिखा और उसे अर्नेस्ट को सौंपा. अर्नेस्ट यह विलियम एग्लिंगटन के स्पिरिट गाइड थे. हालांकि उस संदेशवाहक का स्वरूप देखते हुए वह पत्र मुझ तक नहीं पहुंचा, न ही इसकी संभावना थी, लेकिन पत्र की विषय वस्तु मुझे मिली. मैंने उस समय इसका उत्तर नहीं दिया, लेकिन HPB, जिसे वे उपासिका कहते थे, उनके माध्यम से आपको चेतावनी भेजी. तुम्हारे उस संदेश में कहा गया था कि एसोटेरिक बुद्धिज्म और आइसिस पढ़ने के बाद एक बहुत बड़ी इच्छा थी कि आप अपने आप को मेरे चेला के रूप में रखना चाहते हैं, ताकि आप सत्यता को सीख सके. मैंने मिस्टर सिनेट से जाना कि आपको लगता है कि भारत में जाने के बिना चेला बनना लगभग असंभव होगा. आप आशा करते हैं कि कुछ वर्षों में ऐसा करने में आप सक्षम होंगे, क्योंकि आप जिनके प्रति एहसानमंद है, वह कृतज्ञता आपको अपने देश में रहने के लिए बाध्य करती. मास्टर कहते हैं, 7 साल के परिवीक्षा के दौरान किसी को भारत में रहने की आवश्यकता नहीं है. एक चेला उन्हें कहीं भी पास कर सकता है. थैंक यू. नमस्ते.
Thank you, Meenakshi ji. I request anybody, if you have any questions or would like to discuss something, you may please unmute yourself and ask. So if there are no questions from the audience, before the lecture today, I received a query from one member from MP. I think he's from Ujjain, Brother Sharma ji. And he has asked a question regarding the foreword written by C. Jinraj Das in the 4th edition of this Letters from the Masters of Wisdom, Series 1. So in that foreword, C. Jinraj Das ji has written about the charges which HPB was accused of by the Society for Psychical Research. And Brother Sharma ji just wanted some clarification on that. Brother Tendulkar ji, if you have the foreword, you can go through it, or should I read it out?
Yes, what clarification Mr. Sharma ji wants?
Okay, I will read that part from the foreword. It says that C. Jinraj Das ji, he writes that I wish to draw special attention to the KH letter received by Dr. Annie Besant in 1900. So in HPB, she passed away in 1891, and
Yes.
9 years after she left her physical body, a letter from Mahatma KH was received by Dr. Annie Besant.
Yes, yes.
Now, the Society for Psychical Research had blamed Madame Blavatsky by saying that she had committed a fraud. The letters were fabricated by her, and the Mahatmas were also invented by her. They were not real. Those were the charges. So here, Jinraj Das ji mentions in the foreword that those letters during the period of 1870 to 1888, which were written by Mahatma KH, it was accused that HPB wrote them. The exact same handwriting was found 9 years later in 1900 when Mahatma KH wrote the letter to Annie Besant.
Yes, yes.
So Jinraj Das ji says that the charges don't hold good. If somebody has already left their mortal body, how can they write the letter 9 years after? So
here the point is, if we go chronologically, then HPB expired in 1891, and later received by Annie Besant was in 1900, 9 years after death of HPB. Now the charge against HPB was that she fabricated the letters and she invented the Mahatmas, though there are no Mahatmas in existence. That was the charge of the missionaries in the Kulam affairs, where they used Kulams to fabricate all these stories, where Kulam created that compartment, sliding compartment in the shrine room, and Kulam themselves fabricated the letters and showed that the letters which were received by HPB in the shrine room were actually fabricated by HPB through that sliding compartment. But it was proved when Annie Besant received the letter after in 1900, 9 years after HPB's death, that certainly that letter was not written by HPB. Then who wrote those letters with the same handwriting which was there in all those earlier letters from 1874 to 1884? So that's why Jinraj Das has said that all those claims raised against HPB and by which her character was tried to be spoiled by the missionaries and Kulams, they fail in their attempt when the letter was received by Annie Besant, which proved that masters existed earlier also, and masters still exist. And it was not the act of HPB to send the letters, fabricated letters, and creating an impression on her disciples that masters which really never exist. That kind of impression she created among the disciples, that was the charge against HPB by the Psychical Research Society. And of course, it was only in 1963, I think, that this society also came to the conclusion that HPB was not at all responsible for and answerable to any of the charges which were laid against her by the missionaries. And she was proved free of all those charges. That is what is expressed by Jinaraja Das when the letter was received from the masters by Annie Besant in the year 1900, to show that it was not the fabricated thing by HPB.
Right. Thank you, sir.
What is his question? Means Sarma, Brother Sarma, what is your question? Is clarified in that preface by Srijana Das.
Yes, नमस्कार सर, इट इज क्लैरिफाइड सर, समझ में आ गया है। उन्होंने जो लिखा था इसमें फॉरवर्ड में, उसमें ये जो फैब्रिकेशन वगैरह की बात करी थी वो यहाँ क्लियर हो गई, वो हमको समझ में नहीं आ रहा है। नाउ इट इज क्रिस्टल क्लियर। थैंक यू।
Thank you.
You see, we are continuing this study of Mahatma letters for almost 1.5 years. But there are still people in India. I don't know whether they are in a member of Theosophical Society or outside the Theosophical Society, but they are also. I don't know whether they are watching this program of Mahatma letter class. But I have received two postcard letters from I don't know which place, but they are not giving addresses, just English letter postcard. Why you are doing all these things? They started like this. All these letters are fabricated by Blavatsky, and these great ones are her creation. So, Madhavji, still there are people who are still active to damage the Theosophical Society, even if they are still available in our organization also, damaging our esoteric philosophy. They are more watchful. Mahatma mentioned in one of his letters, they are more watchful than us to damage the organization. So any kind of a doubt, any inkling of doubt will create problem for us. I have received 2 postcards. The moment I received, I destroyed it. Second one immediately. First one I read it. Same thing. Whatever they at that time, the Psychical Research Organization, but they have done at that time. Exactly, there are people who are also doing the same thing now also.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Vibhaji. You can now close it.
Yes, thank you, sir. And thank you to all the participants for joining. With this, we close today's session with a closing prayer. Om Asito Ma Sadgamaya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Lokaha Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। Thank you all for joining. Namaste.
Namaste. So tomorrow we have, as there is no program for a Sunday, so the Sunday program will start from tomorrow at 7:30. We will have a English lecture program by Professor Partha. He will discuss and explain from TS Manual number 5, Astral World. With this announcement, goodbye.